She said it so quietly, I almost didn't hear her. No raised voice. No tears. No warning. Just 7 words that rearranged everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my wife, and the woman I had spent 26 years building a life with. And before I could even process what she had said, she was gone. Not angry. Not running. Just gone. And what I found when I went looking for her that morning changed me in a way I am still struggling to put into words. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click on the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is not important. But her name, her real name, was Margaret. Though everyone who loved her, and there were many, called her Maggie. She was the kind of woman who remembered the name of your mail carrier, who kept a spare umbrella in the car for strangers caught in the rain, who made you feel like the most important person in the room without even trying. I fell in love with her in 1997, in a cramped little coffee shop in Nashville, Tennessee, over a shared blueberry muffin and a conversation about whether Bob Dylan deserved the Nobel Prize in Literature. She said yes. I said no. We argued about it for 45 minutes and somehow ended up exchanging numbers before we left. I proposed 2 years later. We were married in the spring of 2000, on a Saturday afternoon, under an oak tree in her parents' backyard while a borrowed stereo played Van Morrison. It was imperfect and wonderful and completely us. We raised 2 kids in a yellow house outside of Chattanooga. Our son, Daniel, was born in 2002. Our daughter, Claire, came along in 2005. We coached Little League. We drove to school plays and debate tournaments. We argued over Thanksgiving menus and made up in the kitchen. We were not a perfect couple, but we were a real one. And for 26 years, through job losses and family illness and one genuinely terrible year where we almost didn't make it, I never once stopped trusting her. That was my whole foundation. That was everything. So when she sat down across from me at our kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in October, muted the television, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I think you should start seeing other people," I genuinely thought she was joking. I laughed. I actually laughed. And then I watched her face, and she was not laughing at all. She was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her before. It was not sadness. It was not anger. It was something older than both of those things. Something that looked like a decision that had already been made. And that is when the laughter stopped. I asked her if there was someone else. She said no. I asked if she was unhappy. She said she had never been happier in her life. I asked if she was having some kind of breakdown, and I regret that now, but I was scared and I did not know what else to say. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, very softly, "I just don't want you to be alone, Ray. That's all this is." I pulled my hand back. I told her that I did not understand what that meant. She said she knew. And then she stood up, kissed me on the forehead like you would kiss a child who was running a fever, and she went to bed. I sat at that kitchen table until 2 in the morning, turning those words over and over in my head. I just don't want you to be alone. What does a woman who is not unhappy, who claims there is no one else, who has been nothing but devoted for 26 years, mean when she says something like that? What kind of person asks for an open marriage as an act of love? I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark beside her, listening to her breathe, trying to make sense of something that made no sense. Somewhere around 4 in the morning I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, it was light outside and her side of the bed was cold. I assumed she had gone downstairs to make coffee. The coffee maker was silent. The kitchen was dark. Her car was still in the driveway. I called her phone, and I heard it buzzing on the nightstand where she had left it. That was when the feeling in my stomach changed from confusion to something colder. Maggie never left her phone behind. Not once in 10 years of owning one had she ever walked out of the house without it. I stood there in our bedroom holding her phone and I felt the floor shift under me. I searched every room in the house. I checked the basement. I walked around the yard calling her name like a man who has lost his mind, because I think in that moment I had. And then I came back inside and I noticed something. The pull cord for the attic stairs was swinging slightly, the way it does when someone has just touched it. Maggie hated the attic. She said it smelled like old newspapers and regret, which was such a Maggie thing to say. She had not been up there in years. At least that is what I had believed. I climbed the stairs slowly, because some part of me already knew that whatever was up there was going to cost me something I could not get back. The attic was dim and dusty and smelled exactly like she always said it did. Most of the boxes were exactly where we had left them. Christmas decorations. Old baby clothes we had never been able to throw away. A box of records from before we had anything to play them on. But in the center of the attic floor, pulled away from the wall and opened, was a box I had never seen before. It was a plain brown moving box with no label. And inside it was a life that Maggie had been living in secret while I slept next to her every night. There were medical records going back 7 years. Oncology reports from a clinic in Memphis that I had never heard of. Printed emails between Maggie and a doctor whose name I now know very well. Lab results with dates and numbers I did not understand but whose meaning I could feel before I could read them. And then, near the bottom of the box, a manila folder with a word printed on the tab in Maggie's handwriting. One word. The word was prognosis. I opened it with shaking hands. The report inside was dated September of 2017. 7 years before that Tuesday night in October when she asked me if I had ever thought about seeing other people. The diagnosis was stage 3 ovarian cancer. The prognosis, without aggressive and sustained treatment, was written in clinical language that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. The words "limited timeline" appeared twice. The words "quality of life" appeared 4 times. And at the bottom of the page, in Maggie's handwriting, was a single sentence she had written to herself. It said, "Do not let him watch you disappear." I sat down on the attic floor right there among the Christmas boxes and the old baby clothes and I could not move for a very long time. 7 years. She had been carrying this for 7 years. 7 years of driving herself to appointments in Memphis while I thought she was visiting her college roommate. 7 years of filling prescriptions at a pharmacy 2 towns over so I would not notice. 7 years of lying awake next to me at night with this weight on her chest while I slept soundly and trusted her completely, not knowing that the thing I trusted her to tell me was the one thing she had decided I could not know. And now I understood everything. I understood why she avoided talking about the future. I understood why she had seemed distant on certain specific days every year, the anniversaries of her scans, I would later learn. I understood why she had quietly, over the past 2 years, made sure our finances were in order, that the will was updated, that Daniel and Claire each knew where the important documents were kept. I had thought she was just being organized. She was preparing. She had been preparing for a long time. And the open marriage, the thing that had seemed so completely out of character, so inexplicable, was not cruel at all. It was the most heartbreaking act of love I have ever witnessed in my life. She was trying to build me a bridge to somewhere else before she left, so that when she was gone, I would not be stranded. There was also a letter in the box. It was in an envelope with my name on it, not sealed, just folded closed, the way you leave something when you are not sure if you are ready for it to be found but you know it has to be there anyway. I almost could not open it. But I did. She wrote that she had found the diagnosis during a routine checkup in 2017, that she had initially intended to tell me immediately, that she had driven home from Memphis that day rehearsing the conversation in her head. But then she had walked through our front door and found me at the kitchen table helping Claire with a science project, and Daniel was on the couch watching a game, and the house smelled like the chicken I had left in the slow cooker, and she said she just could not do it. She could not bring that word into that house on that ordinary evening. She told herself she would tell me when the time was right. But there is never a right time for something like that, and the weeks became months and the months became years, and by the time she understood what she had done, she felt too far in to go back. She wrote that she had tried to protect me, that she now understood this had been wrong, and that if I was reading the letter it meant she had run out of courage to tell me herself. She wrote, "I would rather share you than leave you with nothing. I know that is not fair to ask. I know that is not your decision to carry alone. I am so sorry, Ray. I am so sorry for all of it. I need to stop here and ask you something, because I think it matters. If you had been in my position that morning, sitting on the attic floor of your own home, reading a letter like that, what would you have felt? Would you have been angry? Would you have collapsed? Would you have understood? Because I will be honest with you, I felt all three of those things inside of about 30 seconds, crashing into each other so hard I could not separate them. I was furious. I was devastated. And underneath both of those things, growing quietly like something that refuses to be extinguished, was a love for her so enormous that it scared me. Because that letter was written by a woman who had spent 7 years in quiet agony trying to protect the man she loved from the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And no matter how wrong it was, no matter how much I wished she had told me, I understood it. I understood it completely. And that understanding was the most painful part of all. I came down from that attic with the letter in my hand and I stood in the hallway of our house and I made a decision. She could not have gone far. She had no car. She had no phone. It was early in the morning on a Wednesday in October, and the town we lived in was small, and I had known it for 26 years. I knew where Maggie went when she needed to think. There was a park about 1.5 miles from our house, one of those small neighborhood parks with a wooden playground and a duck pond and 3 or 4 benches along the walking path. We used to take Daniel and Claire there on Sunday mornings when they were small. Daniel used to chase the ducks with an intensity that made absolutely no sense for a 5-year-old, and Maggie would stand at the edge of the pond laughing while I tried to catch him before he fell in. It was one of those memories that lives in the body rather than just the mind. And I knew she was there. She was sitting on the bench closest to the pond, wearing the gray cardigan she always reached for when the weather turned, watching the water. She looked small in a way that I had not let myself notice before. She looked tired in a way that I now understood had nothing to do with sleep. I walked across the grass toward her, and she heard my footsteps and turned her head, and when she saw me she closed her eyes for a moment, the way you do when something you have been dreading finally arrives, and with it comes an unexpected wave of relief. I sat down beside her. For a while, neither of us said anything at all. The ducks were out on the water. A dog was barking somewhere in the distance. The oak trees along the path were starting to turn, that particular red-orange that only exists for about 2 weeks in October in Tennessee before it's gone. I remember all of that. I remember it the way you remember things that you understand, even as they are happening, that you will carry for the rest of your life. She spoke first. She said, "I didn't want your last memories of me to be hospitals and hair loss and watching me get smaller." I took her hand. I told her that she did not get to decide that alone. She started crying then, quietly, the kind of crying that has been held back for so long that it comes out almost without sound, just tears running down her face while she sat perfectly still. I put my arm around her and she leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat there in that park for a very long time. The ducks moved slowly across the pond. The dog stopped barking. The leaves dropped one by one from the oak trees. And very slowly, for the first time in 7 years, Maggie stopped carrying it alone. We drove home together. We called Daniel that afternoon and Claire the next morning. Those were the hardest phone calls I have ever made in my life, and I will not describe them to you here because some things belong only to the people who lived them. What I will tell you is that over the weeks that followed, we talked more honestly than we had talked in years. We went back to the oncologist in Memphis together. We learned what the options were. There were not many, and the ones that existed were not easy. But we made every decision together, from that day forward, the way we should have been doing for 7 years. We fought about it sometimes, the way people fight when they are scared and love each other and do not know what to do with either of those things at once. But we never went to bed without finding our way back to each other. That was the agreement we made on the bench by the duck pond. No more carrying it alone. Maggie lived for 14 months after that Tuesday night in October. That is longer than the doctors had initially estimated, and I choose to believe that had something to do with what was lifted off of her once she was no longer alone in it. We took a trip to the Pacific Northwest in the spring because she had always wanted to see the redwoods. We drove through Oregon with the windows down and Van Morrison playing on the car stereo, and she fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere outside of Eugene with the sun on her face, and she looked, in that moment, the way she had looked in the coffee shop in Nashville in 1997 when we argued about Bob Dylan. At peace. Completely herself. I had to pull over because I could not see the road clearly enough to drive. She passed away at home, in the fall, 13 months after I found the box in the attic. She was in our bed, in our room, with the window cracked the way she always liked it even in cool weather because she said she slept better when she could hear the outside. Daniel and Claire were both there. So was her older sister, and a friend from college who had driven 12 hours when we called her. I was holding Maggie's hand. The last thing she said to me was not the perfectly scripted thing that people sometimes imagine people say. It was quiet and it was tired and it was exactly her. She looked at me and she said, "You stayed." That was all. Just that. You stayed. And I told her that of course I did. That there was never any question. That there was never going to be anywhere else for me to be. I am telling you this story because I think about what would have happened if I had not gone to that attic. If the pull cord had not been swaying. If I had gotten in my car and driven to work that Wednesday morning and let myself believe she had just needed air. I think about how much time we nearly lost. How much truth we nearly buried. And I think about how many people right now, tonight, while you are watching this, are carrying something alone that the person who loves them most in the world would want to share. Fear does that to us. It makes us protect people by keeping them away from the very thing that could bring them closest to us. Maggie was trying to protect me. She was doing it out of love. But love, real love, is not about managing someone else's pain from a distance. It is about being willing to stand inside of it with them and say, "I am not leaving." It is not always clean or comfortable. Sometimes it smells like dust and forgotten things in an attic you have not opened in years. But it is always, always worth going up the stairs. Now I want to ask you, and I want you to really think about this because it matters. If your partner had been keeping a secret this big, not out of deception but out of love, would you have been able to forgive them? Would you have been able to do what I did and choose to stay? And if you had been in Maggie's position, sitting with something that frightening, sitting with it alone for 7 years, what do you think you would have done? Do you think you would have told the truth sooner? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Because these are not easy questions. There is no clean answer. But they are the questions worth asking, because how we answer them says everything about who we are when love gets hard. If this story moved you, if it made you think of someone you love, if it reminded you that the people beside you are carrying things you cannot always see, please share this video. You never know who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe if you haven't already, because every week we bring you stories like this one, stories about ordinary people navigating extraordinary moments, stories about love and loss and the choices that define a life. Real stories. Human stories. Stories that matter. Because sometimes the quietest kind of love is the kind that stays.